there's definitely patterns in what bases fly where. So for example, from Travis Air Force Base, that's where you're going to see the most flights to Hawaii and the Pacific. East Coast bases, there's some that go up and down the East Coast or within the states, but that's also the best place to catch hops to Europe.
Welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Uniforms. Today we have Stephanie from Poppin' Smoke. She travels a lot using military benefits, and that's what we're going to bring you on today's episode. Stephanie, thank you so much for taking some time off and joining us today.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, of course. You actually just got back from travel. Was that right?
I actually am still in the States unexpectedly. So I was, we were here. We usually spend the summers here. We live in Spain, but I'll go back probably next month, as it turns out, instead of at the end of August.
Nice. Awesome. Well, we definitely would love to hear a little bit about that. But before we get into all of that, just share a little bit about what you do. You know, your husband is a retired, he's a veteran. So yeah, just share a little bit about your service, your experience in the military, and kind of how we got into what you're doing now.
Sure. So my husband retired in 2015. He was in the Army, and we got married about 4 years before he retired. And so, periodically I had never flown Space A or used most of the travel related benefits, but he would often talk about how sometimes he would just take a getaway, for example, from the DC area. He would go down to the beach cottages down in Virginia Beach just for a little getaway for himself. And then we started using facilities in Annapolis and so on. So I was pretty excited when I started learning about some of the military benefits that were available. And I think his dad was in the Army for 30 years and he was in for 30 years. And so it was all just kind of the usual stuff, but it was new to me. And so when I would hear about it, I would say, wow, so you can visit these facilities all over the world and they have golf courses and marinas, and you can take scuba diving, and there's beachfront facilities and so on. I'm like, it's kind of like belonging to a country club worldwide or something. Yeah. So I was wondering why more people didn't talk about and use these things. And so when he retired, I convinced him to take what was supposed to be a gap year. We were just going to take a year off and travel. Just seemed like a good time. And long story short, that kind of turned into that was in 2015, and we didn't really go back to a regular life. But a big component of that was flying Space A. And this was before I started Poppin' Smoke. We flew all over the world using Space A. And I found that so many people from the military community that I talked to either hadn't heard of it or they'd only heard bad things. They heard that it's, you wait around too long, the flights are canceled all the time, and the planes break down and so on. But of course, all those things happen with civilian airlines if you've flown lately. Sure. So that was just basically, I started Poppin' Smoke because I wanted to help members of our community learn how to use the benefits they've earned. And it's not just the Space A flights, it's the lodging on bases, it's the military recreational facilities, it's even MWR, on your local base, being able to join their outdoor rec trips or rent boats at their marina or use the golf course, all those things. They're really fantastic benefits.
Yeah, definitely. And you're right. There was a lot of military members that I talked to that don't know about these benefits. And I had briefly heard about them when I was in. I never got to take advantage of any of those services, although I wanted to. But like you said, there are so many different things that you are, that you're given, I guess. I don't say entitled, but you're given these benefits. And, whether, like you said, it's traveling or recreation or lodging or whatever it is. And you mentioned, obviously, the biggest thing that we heard when I was trying to do it was that it was really confusing, like you said, and there's a process, and it's not easy to get on the process. So for anybody who might be not too familiar with this, like you said perfectly, it is a benefit that we get. Now, let me ask you, can you be separated? Do you have to be retired? Do you have to be a certain disabled percentage? Do you know about any of that info?
Sure. Yes, and that's an excellent question because there's different eligibility. So for obviously for active duty and dependents, that's of course they're eligible. But for veterans, retirees are eligible and they can fly anywhere they can fly anywhere in the world unless a particular location has its own restrictions. But 100% disabled veterans, and it has to be a permanent and total disability, they are also eligible to fly Space A, but only to and from U.S. states and territories, so not to any foreign countries. And there's no exceptions to that rule. People sometimes ask, well, what if we take the rotator or something like that? And unfortunately, no, there is no exception. And then veterans who are not retired and also not 100% disabled are not eligible to fly Space A. They're basically, if you have any service-connected disability, though, all of the other benefits are available to you. And then I'll mention one other group too, surviving spouses of either service members who died while on active duty or while retired. Those surviving spouses are eligible to travel just within the lower 48 states.
Nice. And what about family, like your wife, husband, kids? Can they go along with you?
Yes, it's anyone who is your dependent, like they have a valid military ID still. So it's, I've actually heard of situations where someone's parent has become their dependent in years, but normally it's not your, it's not your parents. My mom would love to fly Space A with us, but unfortunately she is not eligible. But your kids, your spouse, for anyone who is no longer in the military, any of the retirees or the 100% disabled veterans, the dependents must be with their sponsor to fly Space A.
Gotcha. Now, if you do qualify and somebody was interested in looking into doing this, can you kind of give us like an overview? Like, how does it, like, do you have to go to a base? Is there an online place that you go to? And obviously we'll send people to your website here afterwards so they can check out, because you have a lot of resources on your site.
Yes.
But in order to get this process going, if they're eligible, how do you even get this started?
The first thing I would say is really just get the big picture of how the overall process works. And it is a lot of reading, and sometimes people feel overwhelmed, but I think that you really just have to understand what Space A is. First thing to know is that with Space A flights are military missions. So in most cases, they're between 2 U.S. military bases around the world. There are some exceptions. You can see flights just about anywhere, just based on the needs, the mission needs. But most of them are either between 2 military bases, or in the case of the Patriot Express, also known as the Rotator, there are passenger terminals at Seattle Airport and Baltimore Washington Airport. So in most cases, the schedule for the flights is not available until 72 hours in advance. So that in itself is quite different from regular commercial travel. The Rotators, the Patriot Express, those schedules are available for 30 calendar days, but that's the only flight that you'd have any advance knowledge for the most part. And then, of course, the seat releases and the actual show times are not available even for the Patriot Express until 72 hours.
Wow.
So people need to understand that you're fitting in to the needs of a military mission. So you are not the priority. You're effectively cargo. Right. And so I think that's the part that people need to understand, because it can be frustrating, because at 1 minute they needed to deliver some equipment to one location and the mission changed and they need to do it later, or they're going to bring it somewhere else. And that you might have just, lost your free ride, but unfortunately that's just how it goes. And so there's some uncertainty associated with Space A. And that's why I say one of the most important things about it is understanding when you should and shouldn't use it. So you definitely don't want to use it when you absolutely have to be somewhere by a certain time. So whether that's for a graduation, a birthday, a cruise departure, anything for which you have made a non-refundable reservation, you definitely want to fly commercial in those instances. But if you have some flexibility, a little bit of time, a little bit of a spirit of adventure, that's a good time to use Space A.
Gotcha. Now, if you're flexible and you're up for the adventure, where do you actually go to look to see, like, if you fall within that 72-hour window, where do you actually go to check these availabilities?
So most most passenger terminals post their schedules online on the Air Mobility Command website. I can send you a link and we'll post this to, I have a step-by-step guide to where to find all of the flight schedules.
Nice.
But in short, each terminal has its own, all of the terminals that fall under Air Mobility Command have their own page. They publish their schedules there, and that's where you can see who's going where. And then many terminals also publish what's called a roll call report, which shows the departures for the last 1 to 7 days. So
Gotcha.
There's definitely patterns in what bases fly where. So for example, from Travis Air Force Base, that's where you're going to see the most flights to Hawaii and the Pacific. East Coast bases, there's some that go up and down the East Coast or within the states, but that's also the best place to catch hops to Europe.
Yeah.
So
Sure.
that would be really the first step is looking at the flight schedules and understanding which bases fly to the places you want to go.
Gotcha.
And then you do we call it sign up, or you register for the terminals from which you might want to fly sometime within the next 60 days. And that's the 60 days is sort of the duration of your virtual wait list, so to speak. And when you sign up for a terminal, you're not signing up for a particular flight. You're letting them know, this is my information. I would like to fly from this base sometime within the next 60 days. And so that's just how you initiate the process to get on the list.
Gotcha.
And then this is an oversimplification of the rest of the process, but basically once you're signed up, when you see a flight that you hope to take, you go to the terminal within 24 hours of that time listed on the slide. You do what's called marking yourself present, which is sort of like checking in, but it's basically notifying them, I'm here, we are competing for I want to take this particular flight. Then they go through what's called a roll call, where they they call out the names of the people that have made the flight, and it's by priority group. That was something I didn't touch on, but there are 6 different priority groups. The lowest numbered group is the highest priority, which is people traveling on emergency leave. And then it goes on down. Any veterans, whether it's 100% disabled or retirees, and also surviving spouses, we're all in category 6. So the lowest priority category, which is logical, of course, because the rest is for active duty, different situations. So, gotcha. During roll call, they'll start with the highest priority group, and call the people who are in that group, then move on to the next group, call them, and so on. So if there's, an entire C5 has empty seats on the upper deck, there's 73 seats, probably everybody who signed up has a good shot of getting on. But when they only release, a handful of seats, then it can become more competitive.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and that was a good point too. I mean, you brought up the aircraft, C5, C-17, C-130s are probably, I imagine, I don't think anybody would, I'm sure people know this, but you're obviously not going to be flying anywhere in an F-15 or anything like that.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Well, you raise a good point too, because the missions are to and from bases that have transport aircraft. So if there's a fighter base like Fallon or something like that, you're not going to see as many opportunities from that base because it's just fighter jets.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, also, this is just the one way, right? You're not actually getting a round trip ticket, so to speak, right? So to come back, you're going to have to kind of go through this whole same process again, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. So Air Mobility Command has that warning pretty much on every page that there is no guarantee of round trip transportation. So that's the other uncertainty part of it too, is there's not just the concern about getting to your destination as scheduled, but getting back in time for the end of your leave or whatever, event you might have going on back home. So the biggest thing I can say is stay flexible. And that's, I think, our number one strategy for not getting stuck in a foreign country or, where, and having to pay for an overseas flight. So the expression we use is take the first thing smoking. And that means take the first flight that is going to take off and has seats going in the direction of your travel. So if you're at Ramstein Air Base, a lot of people really like those, the Rotator, the PE, because it's a regular commercial aircraft. But lots of people like that one, and it's it's comfortable in that respect. But if you're just trying to get back to the United States and you can hop a C5 into Dover, just take it.
Yeah.
That's then all you have to do is worry about getting from Dover to wherever in the United States you're trying to go. So don't wait around for the perfect flight.
Yeah, definitely. Now aside from flights, you mentioned like you do like the rec stuff, and is the process kind of similar? Is it just kind of like if you want to rent, a kayak or a boat or whatever it is? I don't even know if the military allows boat rentals, but
yeah, they do.
Do they really? Oh wow. Is the process a lot? I'm assuming it's a lot easier, and
Yes.
that's kind of like on a first come first serve, and including lodging as well, like the hotels and all that stuff.
Yeah, everything. The Space A flights are kind of like their own beast, and everything else is pretty straightforward. So, in terms of base lodging, if you're traveling for leisure, you're Space A also for that. And each facility has their own policy and how far advance Space A you can make Space A reservations at some locations. It might be just a couple days. In some locations, it could be a month. And it can also vary by time of year. So during the summer PCS season, they tend to be A, pretty full, and B, they might want to keep those rooms open for families that, come in at the last minute or their orders change at the last minute, those kinds of things. But it's definitely a more straightforward process. And then same with rentals. There's, in terms of just like a boat rental at a marina, for example, we've rented boats at MacDill Air Force Base. They have a nice marina. There's no particular priority. You just, when they go in and pay for it and whatever they have available. The recreational facilities, those vary in terms of their policies, in terms of how far in advance you can register. So typically, there might be one window allowed for either active duty members or even people stationed at that base. They might have actually even more priority. So for example, say they can make their reservations a year out, whereas retirees can make them 6 months out or something like that.
Sure. Yeah,
So
that makes sense.
Yeah, the key with all of this stuff is flexibility. And quite honestly, we do a lot of last minute travel. So even at the most popular military recreational facilities, there's always a last minute cancellation. So if you're willing to book your plans, a little bit spur of the moment, you can pretty much get in.
Yeah, that's definitely good to know, because I think that was one of the biggest reasons why I didn't do it, is because I always heard that you had to basically, if this is a last minute thing, like you could try to plan it. And, obviously with being in the military, like you can plan your leave, but are you going to be able to get into that, that Space A travel or whatever it might be within that
Sure.
a leave that you got approved, which most cases probably not, but
Right.
that's good to know.
We do meet a lot of active duty members flying Space A. I mean, it can definitely be done because you're in the highest priority groups, and it just has to be the right opportunity. Yeah, if you have a week of leave and you're trying to, travel between Japan and the States, then I wouldn't recommend it. But, if you have a long period of leave that you've built up and there's a little bit more to it too, in terms of being able to figure out when is a good time for you to fly, because outside of summer PCS season, which officially basically extends from mid-May to early September. So it's kind of long. And then, of course, during the winter holidays is also a more competitive time. But in general, when schools are in session, that is a much easier time to fly Space A. There's just a lot less competition for seats.
Gotcha. There was one last thing that I don't think we touched on: the cost for Space A.
Mm-hmm.
Is there
Yep.
associated price cost to this?
The cargo missions are free. The only thing that you could possibly need to pay for directly anyway is if you wanted to purchase a meal. They're available $5 to $10 at some bases for some flights. That's not always the case. So I always recommend that people bring their own snacks, because you just never know. The Patriot Express or Rotator, the Space A passengers pay a per person head tax. And the most that it varies by whether you're going from the US to Europe or the Europe back to the US, but it tops out under $40 per person. So, and then of course your meal is included just like on a commercial flight.
I mean, if you're flexible, I guess you can't beat that.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, there can be some indirect costs which people have to be aware of. So if you spend a few nights waiting in lodging, waiting for a flight, and then also local accommodations, those kinds of things, it can add up. So you really need to do some back of the envelope calculations to kind of estimate how much you're likely to save when you fly Space A. And obviously, if you have multiple people, depending on the size of your family, if you're talking about not paying for 4 airfares between the US and Europe, that's a huge savings compared to like if you're a solo traveler and you could find one of those cheap fares for $500, then, unless you're really looking for the adventure of Space A, you might, it's possible if you spend a few nights in lodging on either end, that you're not going to save that much money.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So there's definitely some pros and cons, some perks and things like that to consider. So, I mean, it does, just like everything else, it's got the positives, got the negatives, and just got to do your own research, like you said. So, awesome. Well, this is pretty much it. This has been a lot of great information. We thank you so much for being on here today. Where would people go? So I understand you've got a bunch of resources, some great things for people to check out. Where would they go to download those or check out some more information?
Sure. If you go to my homepage, it's just popandsmoke.com. There's basically 3 main buckets you'll see when you get to the landing page. So if you click on Military Space A flights, you'll find all the information you need. We have a quick start guide that explains the process step by step. Also that explanation of where to find the flight schedules, our recommended packing list, because if you're flying on a cargo plane, you want to be sure there's some things you should bring for a comfortable ride. And then, or you can, starting back from the homepage, click on military lodging. You get all kinds of information about how to stay Space A on bases, details about recreational facilities and that kind of thing. Nice.
And for clarification, that's POPPIN. So it's not popping smoke; it's popping smoke, like you're popping smoke. So for anybody needs clarification on that. Awesome. All right. Well, again, thank you, Stephanie, so much for taking some time out today. And that is it for this one. And we appreciate you all tuning in, listening in, and hope you got some value out of this. Go to popandsmoke.com for any information on Space A travel and recreation. So until the next one, we'll see you. All right. Thanks, Mike.